Welcome to Adeptus On Air, the show where we examine how individuals and companies make decisions that drive their business and personal success. Each week, we connect with notable professionals who pull back the curtain on the industries that Adeptus has been on the cutting edge of for the last 30 years, including music, sports, and entertainment, as well as new emerging markets. So welcome to Adeptus On Air, and today we have a special guest, Miss Hillary Johns, trial lawyer in multiple states. I saw, which is amazing. Let's start there. I usually start chronological. Let's start there. What was the thought process? Because most lawyers I meet are barred in one state that they practice in. But what was the thought process to be able to do trials in multiple states?
Well, I always wanted to be licensed in New York and DC. Those are areas that we do a lot of business. We do a lot of entertainment law, intellectual property, and business and employment law. So given the current state of just national affairs, there's a lot of business there. And we have a lot of clients going, I have to go here, I have to go there. It sort of just made sense to get a license there. And so I got licensed in DC and New York. And it's nice. I think clients appreciated. They're saying, oh, do you know anyone? Oh, we have an office there. So that was nice. And it's a lot more work, but once you get it set up, it is actually a lot more efficient, and we're able to provide more services to clients based on that too. I've often seen that where clients like, I have to get a real estate attorney, I have to get an estate attorney, I have to get this, and they have like this whole fleet of lawyers, and they need them, but it's a hassle for the client too, I think. So that's your setup. In Montana, I just like Montana, and I have property there, and I thought about it. So I was like, if I was going to retire or live up anywhere other than California, where would I live? And Montana was the answer there. So I got admitted there. Yeah, that's a different world, but it's very, very interesting. And, I consider it an honor and a privilege to be a lawyer. So I don't mind doing it. I mean, it's more bar fees, more things you have to pay attention to, but I don't mind doing it. I really don't. And but in New York and DC in particular, we're very, very active with business there. And it's nice for clients to say, hey, can I call you about this? Could you help me with this? Oh, good. I don't have to start over and go meet someone else and develop a relationship with them. So that was the thinking.
That makes perfect sense. And from a novice in this field like myself, what are some of the differences from state to state? Why would there be different tests in different states? What would some of the differences be that a lawyer would need to know?
Well, a big one would be, I think it's a big one, is the two-party consent rule. In the state of California, yes, you have my consent to record today. It's a two-party consent rule. So if you're having a conversation, someone calls you and leaves a voicemail, they know they're leaving a voicemail. If you're out in a public place, like out in a restaurant, or you have a reasonable right, you sort of know you give up some of those rights of privacy. But if you're having a private conversation in the state of California, you can't record it. It's illegal to do that. There are certain exceptions, but it's not because you think it's an exception. There are legal exceptions for that. So you have to say, hey, I'm recording this. Other states like New York, it's a one-party consent rule. I believe, I'd have to double check, but I did recently, and I think that DC and Montana are both one-party consent rules. So you can record in certain circumstances. I would say that would be the big one. I know that in the state of Montana, for example, you're able to discriminate in employment situations, whereas certain employment situations, such as LGBTQ status, and other states, obviously that would be clearly wrong, and that is wrong. But they have different rules in how they approach things. I know that Montana has a modified view of the stand your ground rule, which is if you come on someone's property, you can, obviously in the state of California, you have to, there's a lot of things you'd have to do to get to that and things like that. And there are different rules about gun laws, for example. We're not into gun law, but it's, there are rules that you should be aware of, things like that. So those would be some of the main ones. There are some more nuanced ones, for example, in employment law, like wage and hour claims, things like that too. And you probably often see that, like, you have the Johnny Depp trial. You're like, well, why did he go to Virginia instead of another state? There's like forum shopping and things like that, because people look at jury makeup, laws there, not just laws there, statute of limitations, but, what am I going to get if I go to this state? And so many people are online these days. There's a lot, like we are. I mean, normally we'd be, in the old days, we'd have met in person, met in your thing there, and, had everything set up. But people are very, very mobile. They're able to go to other states. And online commerce is just very, very different from what it used to be. So people look to that to, exploit those to their advantage or use those to their advantage. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, you want to get a good deal.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot. And I know you mentioned the stand your ground rule. That's pretty big here in Florida, where I am.
Mm-hmm.
As far as that law. So that's interesting. All those differences, and you really touched on many different fronts. It wasn't just guns or business or commerce. It's just it seems like that can laws can change state to state in all different areas of really life, quality of life. So that's interesting. Um, Take us back if you can. Growing up, a lot of people say I want to be doctors and lawyers and things like that, but most people don't follow through on that may say that. When did you know your path as a lawyer? Was this something that happened early on? Was this something that happened in college? How did it all come about from the beginning?
It was early on. It was early on. I pretty much knew because I was one of those kids who thought about what am I going to do when I grow up and things like that. And my dad was a lawyer. My godfather's a lawyer. And I watched a lot of Perry Mason and I was like, I want to
Hmm.
do that. They had Della Street, the secretary. I'm like, well, then women could go into the courtroom. So I'm like, I want to do that. That seemed like a good gig. You could make a living. You got to do things. And I liked that you got to see the interesting aspects of things and that I wasn't just sitting at a desk all day doing this. And I was like, yeah, no, I want to do that. I want to be a lawyer. So I always kind of knew. I didn't, and I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I mean, a lot of the work we do is outside of the courtroom because that's a big part of it. But
Yeah.
uh, that's what I wanted to do. I knew what I wanted to do, and I didn't really. I thought briefly about law school, about medical school, but there's a lot of science, and I don't like to be around sick people. I don't.
Mm. Yeah.
It's not. I don't mind the blood. The blood doesn't bother me. The blood, the guts. It doesn't bother because that's part of your body. But I just I didn't want to be around sick people all the time. So I was like, that probably idea.
Yeah, that rules out the doctor part.
You're sick today. I can't see you. Now come back later when you're feeling better.
Yeah.
Would probably not be something the patient would want to hear.
Very good point on that. Very good point. What is the process of taking on a client for you? I'm sure it might be different from lawyer to lawyer, but how do you, I mean, I would assume it's almost a selection process at this point, where maybe you turn down some clients. What would that process be like for you?
Well, one, what the issues are, one to make sure that we don't have a conflict, obviously, that we haven't, sometimes we'll get people like, hey, you represent such and such, but could you help me too? I'm like, no, you really can't because if there were, oh, we're getting along, yeah, but you may not later. Part
Okay.
of it is the subject matter of what the issue is going to be, what their legal issue is. Part of it does depend on workload because if my partner and I are, for example, in trials, often we have to say, hey, we can't assist you right now. I'm sorry. We can either give you, if we can, we try to give a referral. We can't always do that either. But we try to say, are we able to take on this client? Because sometimes there are just matters, of life, like someone invites you to an event or a party and you go, I'd love to come, but I can't, I just,
Yeah.
and you have to be fair to the client. And if you are going to take someone as a client, you have to be able to we give very prompt attention. That's one of the things we do here. You don't have to sit and wait 3 weeks to get an appointment with me or my partners or my staff. We get back to you. So one, if we're able to take on the client. Two, I mean, there's other issues too. What if the client has realistic expectations? Some clients want millions and millions and millions of dollars, or they want to put something together that is probably not realistic. So I think everybody likes to think their case is special, different, and unique, and they are. But it doesn't mean they have a value there. And two, if you're going to get along with the client, I think that is really important. I think lawyers are in a position where they're confidants in all fields, and they should be able to feel like I can talk to my lawyer, I can address my concerns. If I'm not happy with something, I can tell them. I know that traditionally there was kind of this thing where it's like going behind the Iron Curtain to talk to your lawyer, and you walk in and there's all these nice chairs and everything. You're like, I don't want to touch anything. And you go in and you're like, and you feel almost like you're doing something wrong to ask your lawyer something. If you're not happy with something or you're concerned, you should feel comfortable telling your lawyer, hey, there's this. I don't mean, hey, I didn't get enough sleep last night. I want to talk to my lawyer about it. But,
Yeah.
we handle very, very private, and some of them are very high profile matters and very personal matters sometimes, even if it is your business. And you should feel like you know what, I like my lawyer's not only going to do a good job, but I'm comfortable with them. So, you know, if you have someone who's yelling and screaming in the phone, that's probably not going to work out. You know, and I
Very true.
understand, but there are situations like a person may have been traumatized. They may be very upset. You know, I think personality does factor into it. I know. And what they are looking at in terms of, there's also the issue of affordability. I mean, sometimes we have clients and they want to do something. I'll tell them, I go, you know, this is about what you're looking at. You know, there may be another way to do that. Sometimes insurance will cover something, you know, and
Okay.
as much as we had a matter that we just referred out the other day, and as much as we like them as clients, they had insurance coverage. I mean, that's certainly much better for them. And, you know, talk about the situations there, you know, whether the client is emotionally able to handle that and wants to handle that, because sometimes after talking to a lawyer, we've had clients come to us like, I want to do this, I want to sue. And I'm like, this is what you're probably looking at. You know, is it better just to walk away from this and leave it? You know, is it worth pursuing? Is it not? You know, sometimes they need to go through that process, but I don't want to just take money from somebody, you know, and just to tell
Yeah.
them, you know, there's not a lot I can do for you. So those are things that factor into it too, but I think those would be the main ones. And it's, you know, lots of people, sometimes it's just a matter of, we're not taking any of those on right now. It doesn't have anything to do with the client. I've had times where I would love to take the case, but I just can't because I'm, you know, preparing for a trial or there's something else that needs my attention. We have other matters to attend to. So there are things like that too. I mean, I know there's some lawyers who don't like to say no. And I think that you as a lawyer, you have to. I mean, it's a business, you know, first and foremost, and you're not helping your client at all. If you're like, doing you know, shoddy job or just doing it, you know, is it looking, glancing, going, hey, I'm sorry, I haven't gotten to it. And, you know, people don't get back to you and things like that. I mean, they have a right to expect prompt service, whether or not it works out, you know, things like that. So those are the kind of things I look at.
Very, very well said. And I know from our business too, every client feels their matter is the most important matter, you know, and to some degree you have to, you know, you have to approach it that way. And it seems like over time, I guess my next question for you is, you've understood what your bandwidth is in terms of how many cases you can take at the same time and et cetera. How long did it take you to kind of understand that, or has it changed? You know, did your bandwidth grow? Did it shrink? You know, as you got more experience or took on bigger, high profile cases? How did you kind of manage that over time to master that?
Well, the first time I got yelled at by my boss because I didn't get back to a client the same day, and he goes, "Why didn't you get back to the client yesterday?" I go, well, "I thought I'd do it today," and he goes, "No, you'll do it today. We get back to clients the same day, always within 24 hours, 48 if we do it. Don't ever do that again." And I didn't. He was right, you know that, and that, you know, it was reasonable to expect. And I think one is, you know, the longer you can't always know. I mean, we're working on a few matters right now that have taken up far more time than they thought they would. You know, you don't always know. I think you have to give yourself some leeway and just sort of learn from experience, like how much time this is going to take. I mean, to be sure, there are situations in cases, particularly in litigation, you know, where things develop or you don't really anticipate those, and you have to be able to make allowances for it. I mean, part of it is too. I have a great staff and attorneys who work here, so they're a big part of, I mean, I can't do what I do if they don't do their jobs, and they do a great job. So it, that's part of it. But I think you sort of learn and look at it. I kind of try to follow the 80-20 rule
Okay.
where,
Yeah.
you know, we're at 80% capacity, because that way, if something goes over, if you start at 100 or 110, 115%, and you have more to do, I mean, there's just only so much, you know, there's not enough percentage to go around there. So
Yeah.
you sort of have to do that. And sometimes you have to say no to things, you know, sometimes I have to reschedule. You know, I have a lot of friends who are professionals too, so they understand it. Like a good friend of mine's a doctor. She got called into something. I mean, I get it. You know, there's someone who needs her or
Yeah.
needs medical attention literally and needs her, you know, so I think there's a flexibility and a give and take with those types of things. And some are pressing and urgent, some are not. You know, it's not always a 5 alarm fire. And, you know, so you sort of have to manage those. But I've just learned from experience too. But sometimes it does happen to every lawyer I know. I know that sometimes like this is just taking up so much more time, you know, than I thought it
Mhm.
was. Or there's new witnesses, or there's a story that comes out in the media, you know, things like that too. Or there's been this happened over the weekend. Oh, by the way. So I think you just in time you kind of learn. I mean, I don't know everything. I'm not always right. I'm not. I do my best. I try to estimate that and things like that. But we do have backup plans too, which I think helps. And, you know, saying if this happens too. We're planned for that. So there's someone here to give assistance. One of the biggest complaints to the state bar, other than, the recent thing with Mr. Girardi and some other situations, is that I don't have a tail. That's my cat here. He wanted to meet you. And
Hello.
so it's
Name the cat.
Trigger.
Trigger.
So, but, the other one is not getting return phone calls. You'd be very surprised. And so I always say to lawyers, I go, for no other reason, for your license and for your professional reputation, get back to clients. They have a right to a prompt response. If they're calling 5 or 6 times a day and emailing every day and, in a constant state of panic, that's one thing. There may be other issues there, but they have a right to know those. But you often hear, about these people like, I just don't hear from my lawyer at all. I don't know what's going on. I have no idea. No one's told me anything. And, that's distressing. If you're sort of, if you went to a doctor and something, it's like, I don't know. I haven't heard from them in months or over a year. I don't know if anything's good or bad. I have no idea. That's stressful. And, you have to be sensitive, I think, to the fact that your clients are in a world that they probably don't understand. They probably heard things about it. We often get, oh, such and such told me this or such. One case is not like another. Just because someone got a result there does not mean it's going to happen here. And they're really relying on their lawyers to help them and to help them make decisions. The big decisions, like whether to settle, whether to go to trial, if they have a choice, are always the clients. And we always tell them that, but they also rely on saying, I don't know. Sometimes they go, what do you think I should do? And I say, well, here's your options. So we never make the decision for them, but they are relying on us to do that and to give them some insight to that. We can never guarantee what's going to happen, but we can at least give them reasonable expectations usually. And so, to not get back to a client promptly. Again, if a client's calling all the time and texting and is having panic attacks and, that may be a mental health thing or something else like that, that's a different matter because there can be harassment and things like that. But as a whole, they should be able to feel like, I can get in touch with my attorney. Their staff is here. If they're involved with something, their staff is going to notify. Okay, I know where they are. They're going to get back to me, and we're here to assist them, not to just take their money and leave. That's never okay, ever.
Exactly.
If our services have completed and the file is closed, and they're calling for years and years on end, and we have had instances of that. Sometimes you do have to cut them off and say, look, you need to stop calling and get other counsel. We can't keep answering questions for you. That's not appropriate either. There's a limit, but most people are reasonable. Those are the rarity. Those are unusual that those happen. More people not understand it's a business. They don't want to be calling their lawyer for things. They want to, if they're calling us, there's a problem.
Exactly.
And they're either, and they're concerned, or they want to put a deal together and they need our assistance to do it. They want it done and they want to go. They're not looking to sit with their trial lawyer the whole time. They don't want to do that. I understand. I always say I'm doing my job if they never have to call me. So if they don't have to call me again or see me, then I'm doing my job right.
No, very, very well said with that. And again, I'm asking this from a novice perspective, but I'm very interested in it. You mentioned settlements. I'm sure you've been on both sides of the equation where maybe the person you were with wanted to settle, and maybe the person you were with had the other party that wanted to settle. How does that come about? Just as you're going in the middle of a trial, and then all of a sudden there's a settlement, it stops everything. How does that happen?
Well, it can happen at any time. Someone could walk out to I could get a note. I've gotten notes from counsel. I've been literally walking up the courthouse steps or into the courtroom, or like I've been in the courtroom and I've had both my client and the other say, hey, can I talk to you? Hey, can I go outside? I don't want to do that. I'll take the deal. Or during trial, they'll say, it's a very nerve-wracking experience for some people to be in trial, and they're like, I just don't want to do this. You know what? I'm okay with that. And sometimes people are angry, they're stressed out, they feel like they've been wronged, and they want their justice, and then they go, and sometimes settlement is often the better way to go. Not always. Some cases need to be tried. They really do. And I'm always surprised how many of those cases we get. This is actually going to trial. We'd like you to do it. But there are situations where it really can be worked out. And they do say a good settlement is usually when someone is not completely happy. Both parties are not completely happy with it. They're glad it's over. They have the finality. They have the security of knowing it's done. But they're like, yeah, if I went to trial, I could have got this. Or maybe I want to do this. It's sort of, so you'll often see this period like in mediation or something. they'll settle. But if you're in courtroom, we always recommend you go on the record, and you have that way. There's a record of the settlement, because what can happen if you have a verbal agreement through anything else, or even in writing, like emails between attorneys, that my client doesn't want to sign now. That does
Mm.
happen.
Wow.
It can happen at any point. And sometimes people are like, they just look and they go, I don't need to do this anymore. That's it. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever dealt with something in your life and you go, yeah, I'm done with it. It's
Yeah.
just not worth, and let's just do it. I got to move on. And then a lot of times it's business, or they have other things going on in their life, and they're like, look, this is just not worth the fight anymore. I was upset. I wanted to fight this. Now, not so much anymore. I really don't. And there can be lots of valid reasons for doing this. And sometimes it's just a change in perspective. Like, I've had clients where they're like, there's no way I'm doing this. This is wrong. I go, let me ask you this. What is it worth? Is it worth to you to pay this person to never have to see them again? They'll go, oh yeah, that often is effective. Not always.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's worth it to you, because they're shifting it from, I'm paying because I did something wrong, to, I want you gone, and
Exactly.
I'm willing to pay you up. Emotionally, there are ways to justify that too. And sometimes it's just good business, or things could change in their personal lives. Things could change in their professional lives. Sometimes it does happen where they go through litigation, they're preparing for trial, and they're like, after 2 years, like I have a case right now, it's been going on for 6 years.
Wow.
I
Six
had a
years.
hearing 6 years, and I had a case in court yesterday where it's been prepping for this for was it yesterday? Well, recently, I should say. I shouldn't say yesterday, because I don't think that's accurate. But we've been preparing for this for 14 months, just
Wow.
for a hearing where not much got done. So,
Wow.
there's the strain, there's the stress, and sometimes after a period of time, people are like, yeah, I don't want to keep doing this. This is, I want, there is the issue of finality, because it's stressful, because it's something that's always there until it's done.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
it's been my experience. A lot of people, when they're in litigation, they'll ask other people because they've been there, and sometimes they get good advice, sometimes they don't.
Mm.
And sometimes and everybody's personal experience is different. And so what you may perceive as something, I may perceive as something very different. Trigger may see it completely different, because he says he may be thinking, just pet me and I don't care. And so everybody has a different view. So just because you or I would be like, yeah, that makes sense, I feel it, someone else may not feel that way. And, again, people they could be getting remarried, they could have health issues. We've had the pandemic, they could be having kids, they could be starting up a new business venture. If they're in entertainment, maybe they're starting into the project. They're like, I don't need this. Maybe they're concerned about their reputation. And maybe they're like, for a while, like, I won't pay a penny. They're like, forget it. It's only money. I'll pay this and I'm done.
Yeah.
There is something to be said for not having that stress in your life too. So there are a lot of reasons to do it. Some are like, I'm sick of the media coverage. I've
Mm.
gotten or I've made my point. Sometimes
Oh, yeah.
people feel comfortable saying, what, I made my point. I could have won if I'd wanted to, but I'm going to do this. Sometimes people feel they're being the bigger person, and sometimes they are. Sometimes judges and mediators can be very, very effective. We've had judges get there and say, be more reasonable about expectations, saying, you're not going to get this, you're not going to get this. And sometimes I can tell a client till they're blue in the face, I don't think you're going to get that. I think this is a more realistic range. And then the judge comes in and says this, and this, and they're shocked, or they're like, oh my God. And then but judges are often very good about that. They go, look, if I don't tell you, the judge is going to.
Mm.
You can look at the correspondence from opposing counsel and get mad if you want. And then I've had situations where judges have told both parties and their attorneys, guys, this is the way it's going to go in my courtroom. And then they're
Wow.
like, you get a new judge? No, you can't. It's, and I do tell them, judges are people too. They have lives, and people, I think, sometimes forget that, because they think it's like putting something into a computer and just getting an objective view. It never works that way. Not that judges aren't fair, they are, but they're people too. And so sometimes they say, it depends on a lot of factors, and they come in but sometimes once a judge says something to them, or a mediator or an arbitrator, they're like, even if it's not a final ruling, they see things differently. It's like anything
Yeah.
else. You read something, you see something, you watch a movie, you hear something from someone else. Like, have you ever had this situation where someone has told you something several times, and then someone else tells you and you go, oh yeah, that you don't really
Yeah.
know? oh yeah, that
Yep.
makes total sense. And your friend be like, I've been telling you this
Yep.
for for this whole time because
Forever.
I've had it both ways. I've had people keep telling me stuff, and someone else I hardly know tells me like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and people are like, oh god. And I've been same thing where I've told people and they go, oh yeah, well I realized this, and so sometimes having a judge or mediator, they see it differently, and it's because there's that emotional detachment or objectivity. So it's these are conflicts like these are tough because there's often a lot at stake. Their livelihood, their reputations, their pride, their money.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's their safety. And other work they may be doing, or there's a lot that goes into these. And there's different viewpoints too. Some is very personal. If it's a smaller business, it can be very personal. Some, if it's a big business, huge business, they're like, look, this is the cost of doing business. What do we need to do here? And so there are lots of other issues that can come into it.
Yeah, wow, very well explained, and that actually brought me back to the last time I had jury duty. Actually, in Miami, I was in Miami. I got picked for jury duty. It's about 7 years ago, and I remember sitting in the room just waiting, and they made an announcement in the room saying, "All right, everyone can go home. The case was settled," and everybody like, yeah, the people, so we almost felt like we kind of got a break. We didn't
Yeah.
actually have to go to trial and get picked and all those kind of things. But yeah, that's and at the time I didn't really kind of put the process together. But they settled and they ended up not going to trial. They came very close to going to trial, but they ended up settling right before. So that's interesting to know from the inside kind of how all the different factors can play into that and how that works. Um, what would you say, Hillary, are some of your most memorable cases and why? And they could be memorable for whatever reason. If it was high profile, not high profile, or lengthy or short, or what were some?
I do. I remember my first trial. It did turn out not to be my first trial, but I remember my first trial I won where they sent him away to jail, and it was very satisfying to know because it was a lot of work. And my boss said, "This is part of my investment in you. I want you to go try this case. If you want to be a trial lawyer, let's have you do this." And it was very satisfying to get a verdict like that on all counts, and to have that done and have someone taken into custody. I was like, "Oh, that's nice." I do remember one case where we won, and unfortunately, two people died during litigation. It was a win, but it was kind of one of those cases which I always felt like you win, but you don't really win. I
Yeah,
learned a lot from that.
yeah.
And I would say I tried a case a few years ago. I tried a case about last year that it was a huge mess, but we were able to pull a mess together, and it was interesting to see how it played out in the courtroom. And I tried a case a few years ago. Actually, I don't usually become friends with client, but one of the clients turned out to be a good friend of mine, and we tried that up in the Bay Area, and it was a hard fought case, but it was one of these cases where I literally said, and as to each of these, I'm not saying which are high profile and which aren't.
Yeah.
Uh, for privacy reasons. I think it was one of those cases. I just remember one because we became such good friends, but two, it was sometimes cases just have to be tried. I literally remember telling her, I go, look, you're not going to do any worse if you go to trial. You might as well go to trial and sit in court for a couple of days and just deal with it. And it was a 2 day. It was not a long trial. It was a 2 day. I think it was a 3 day, 3 or 4 day trial. It was not long.
Okay.
It was a bench
Yeah.
trial, but it went and we won, and she did much better, frankly, than either of us thought she would do.
Wow.
And it was great. And it was, we had one a year and a half ago. I learned a lot from it too, where we were just duking it out. It was just a fist fight throughout the thing. And we got a really good defense verdict, not liable on all counts, which other defendants did not get. I mean,
Mm,
they got hit with the verdict. They got hit with attorney's fees. They got hit with punitive damages, which, if you know what those are the ones that can really make it big. It was just, I mean, it just, I learned a lot. You always learn a lot. I always learn from my trials. I learn a lot from my clients. I learn all the time, which is nice. That's one of the nice things about being a lawyer is you can always learn. But I just learned it was just one of those cases where even, and this was during the pandemic when we tried two of these cases, and there've been they were like, we've had one other trial in here. They had the shields, like the court reporters, like, please stay away from me and don't come near me. To the
mm.
witnesses, everybody had masks on. They were disinfecting during breaks. I mean, it was really
Wow.
what they're still doing, but not as, stringently as they were then. And then went into another courtroom where I remember I took a wipe, because I had them with me, and I like put it under, I showed it to my client. She's like, that's disgusting. It was just like all when you have fingerprints on the
Yeah.
thing, they're
Yeah.
public buildings. I mean, courtrooms are not clean places. Okay. They are just not. You think of the sheer number of people go through there. It's not that any one person is not clean, but when you touch things, have you ever seen a door where they've not cleaned it in a while and there's like fingerprint,
Yes.
it was
Yes.
that, it's like,
Wow.
but I just remember, these were two cases during a pandemic. I mean, I was not comfortable in either situation. No one was. The judge wasn't, the staff wasn't, the witnesses that we had all the witnesses come in, because you're putting your life at risk to be there. I mean, this was not, I was just like, God, everyone stay away from me. I was taking, essentially Silkwood showers, to get these, and I was concerned. I was like, oh, everybody was testing and things like that. But these two cases had to be tried. They were not going to settle, and they needed verdicts, and we were successful in both, and they were different kinds of, one was very high profile, one had far reaching implications, but it's, I just know sometimes you have to go into court. Things have to be, they can't be resolved any other way. You have to know that in those things, you're the lawyer and that's your job. And, we really were just duking it out. I mean, there were times where and it doesn't always go that way, but like each question was, am I objecting? Am I this? Things like that. The judges were working for it too. Their staff was working for it. Everybody was. And those are sometimes you have to do that, but that's what makes the justice system work. I mean, that you have these kinds of things, and it's it was one of the benefits during the pandemic, which I guess we're still in, is I was on call for jury duty, and I got someone like, yeah, you're coming in this day, and then that was literally, I think it was in April of 2020 when I was being called in. They started closing everything in that March, I think March and April, late March, that time period. So they just said, no, there's not going to be any jury trials. You're dismissed. I'm like, okay, great. That was kind of, because I was having to make arrangements at the office. I'm like, okay, you're going to have to cover my cases here. And I just, I don't know if I'm going to be called. Well, I always hope I'll just say I'm a trial lawyer and I try a lot of these and you don't want me as a juror, but I have to be fair. And, I do know trial lawyers have been called as jurors, and like, oh yeah, one of the attorneys in my office got called for one. He liked being called for jury duty. He actually enjoyed it, and he was like, he actually sat on the jury. I'm like, I really need you back at the office. Like, yeah, I'm on this. I'm like, all right, do your civic duty. I always appreciate people are willing to be on juries, because it's a lot to ask. It is. They don't pay you anything. I mean, they do something, but it wouldn't even cover your parking. If you're working, you may be giving up income for that time period, and you're willing to put your feelings aside and sort of think about this, to make the system work. So I appreciate juries who are willing to do that. And, it is a lot to ask. It is. I mean, it is your duty. So I always tell myself that. I'm like, think of all the juries you've been in front of, and witnesses and people you've called, and now you're saying you don't. Yeah. I have to do my part to contribute here. So it's.
Yeah, just to see both sides, just the irony of that, and that's really interesting. Have taxes ever, not ever, but how often does tax issues come up in trials that you've been in?
Tax issues, they come up more often than you think, because there's always the tax. We don't do tax law, but we consult, and we have great attorneys who do that, and we refer them. They come up quite a bit, I would say, in settlements. If a case settles, how that's going to be characterized. And, we always make sure that they've consulted with a financial advisor or tax attorney to know how they're going to be. We always advise them as to that. With businesses, there are the other issues. It wouldn't be so much trials or jury. Being a new business, tax implications. I would say, so any settlement or verdict. There's also the issue of profits and losses. If you have, how taxes factor into that. There's also the issue of how much money a person may be making, because that may be another issue too. I'm not making any money because, see my tax returns, I don't have anything. It says zero here. It says I actually got money back. Well, just because you get a tax refund, because the taxing authorities think you're good, does not mean it is okay and everything else. There are ways, and it's legal, it's ethical, it's appropriate. That's why the laws are there. But just because you were able to make good use or take advantage or exploit or whatever you want to say of, tax laws and deductions and things like that, does not mean you're not making any money. So I
Yeah.
see that come up very often. It's like, oh, I didn't make any money from that. So it's like, well, that's not the whole story, is it here? And there are other issues there. And, again, I have not seen Donald Trump's tax returns. I do not know what they say. I'm not getting into politics, but we all know what a big deal that was where he paid allegedly. And again, I have not been involved in these. Doesn't pay any money in taxes and gets out, but we all know he has a lot of money. How does that work? There are intricacies of the tax code and things like that. So I do think it comes up quite a bit too. Or if you have a business, say, well, the business isn't really doing that well. It's not making much money because, look, I didn't, on my paper, I don't make any money, but, then maybe there is. And it doesn't mean anybody's deceiving someone. It doesn't mean, sometimes it does. But those are those kinds of issues. I do also see situations where, like, I'm going to call the IRS on this person. I'm going to call immigration. I'm going to call the police. I'm going to sue them for self-care. Not usually recommended to do those kinds of, they just want to get this person. They want revenge. They want to be vindictive. They want to do whatever. It's not a good idea. It's not always advisable. And it doesn't always get you what you want. It may feel good when you're sticking it to someone saying, I'm really punishing this person, but that's not always a good idea. But I do know particularly with settlements and verdicts, tax aspects of that are different too, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know sometimes there's a lot of like forensic accounting that might come into things to look into it. I know our firm's been called on a few things for that. I just wanted to ask, like, how much has the lawyering field changed from the moment you got in to now? And in what way? What's different? What's different now?
Well, that's a great question. Several things. One, I would say, and I am clapping the Me Too movement, because that is really people I don't think appreciate how much things have changed. I mean, I know they're talking about there's a lot of work to be done. It's certainly true, but at least for me and several other women, and I don't like to say minorities and people of color, and they didn't get into distinguishing. There are a lot of people who have benefited from that, and I do think that there are a lot of people who probably were in positions to other people who are certainly more qualified and better talent, because the Me Too movement has really it's been a huge change for me. And I do think that you don't always see, women running firms on different coasts, and you certainly do, but or it was a women-owned firm, it was kind of that, and that's fine too. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but there were it's really opened options. I would say that what I'll call the Zoom age. With this pandemic, what we're doing right now, I mean, I always used to think it was pretentious when you'd be like, I have you on video call. I have you here. I have my headphones on. And it's like, what are you doing? We're on this is, seeing that kind of stuff was some weird techie thing you saw, and you never, it's like, this is not what you do here. This is, that is very common. And those are the two big ones recently. I would also, but being able to reach that number of people, I would say is a big deal. And there's been a lot of, I had one other one, but I'll probably remember it later. And when I do, I will tell you. Yeah. But those are huge changes. I think, just being able to reach out. I know people think that there's two-dimensional things, but you used to have to drive all the way. Think about it. For us to talk, I'd fly, and I love Miami, so I don't mind. But it's one of my favorite cities. It really is.
It's great out here.
Yeah, so I would fly out to, hey, how are you? But I think there's the speed, the efficiency, the time of that sort of thing. I've seen those developments. I've also seen, I know where it was, the use of the media. It's always been there, and public opinion, but like if you see, like, I mean, an extreme example would be the Johnny Depp trial. For those who didn't watch that, the Harry and Meghan was another attempt to influence you, even though there's some not really lawsuits going on further, maybe, I don't know. But there are, now media has become an essential part of a lot of strategies and a lot of tactics in litigation, and what you can and can't say. And, it used to be, for example, you'd say no comment, and that was okay to say. Now, and better wisdom now says, hey, maybe that's not a good idea. You should have some sort of statement or say something. So the use of the media, I think, has really, really changed. I mean, I remember when I was a first or second year, my boss said, I can't discuss what it was about, but there were some allegations made frankly, as our client, I think. And he said, oh, I had to go over to court. He goes, just get it continued or whatever. He said, oh, by the way, there's been this, and this, which I didn't know. And, there may be news cameras there. I'm outside the courtroom or outside. But, so if they do, just give them my number, tell them to call me, and I'll make a statement. I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's good you didn't tell me before I was going over there. But there was always that, where there was the news, and the news is great, but it can only cover so much.
Yep.
So if you didn't make the local news or CNN, that was or Tom Brokaw, when he was on, or that kind of thing, you weren't going to be, people weren't knowing that. Maybe you get a magazine article or a local story. Now news is everywhere. I mean, it's on social media, it's on photos, it's on, and I think there are a lot of positive developments from that. I mean, people feel heard. There are stories that you would never know of. I think I like that there's so much information, just as long as you know when to say stop, because people get inundated and then they get consumed, and there's a lot, there's also a lot of anxiety. I mean, I am so glad I'm not a kid now.
Oh, man. Yeah.
I don't think I would have wanted to grow up in an environment where everything I did was being photographed, and I had to worry about this. I mean, because let's call it for what it is. All of us have done something we're embarrassed about, not illegal, wrong, or criminal behavior, or have a photo that you do not, just if you get the wrong slide, you could have that. I would not. I don't know how these kids deal with this. I mean, that would cause me anxiety.
Yeah, and there's a lot of comparisons. You're comparing yourself to the people you see on social media and everything. If you're a young kid.
I know. There's a lot of aspects there. So those generations have a lot to deal with, and it's very stressful. If you're a public figure or a celebrity, I mean, yeah, they're agreeing to do it. They know what's coming, but to actually have to live it and to give up that much of your privacy. I mean, I've had clients like in courtrooms where they're like, people are coming up to them and wanting to touch them, and they just, it's like, okay, these are people too. They may be busy right now. To me, it would be. I was always, even before I represented, I was always more, and I grew up in those environments anyway, so I'm probably used to it. But it's like, they may be having a quiet dinner there. They may not want, or it's if they're walking with their head down or talking to someone, they probably don't want somebody running up to them. Yeah, they expect it, but if they're in the courtroom with their attorney talking and pacing back and forth, or have their head like this, they probably don't want to talk to anybody right now. I mean,
Exactly.
just to be a decent human being,
Exactly.
To me, it seems sometimes, and I'm not faulting fans. I think they're super and they're a huge source of support, but I think that people sometimes don't think about, celebrities have a lot to contend with in that respect. I can see how that would be very, very stressful not to have any kind of privacy. And you give that up to some degree, but on the other hand, do you really, can you really appreciate how much that is if you get into that? But those would be the use of media, the Me Too movement. I would say the Zoom age has made a huge, there's been others to be sure, I think, but those have been, and I think you also see, a lot of giants have fallen, that people never thought would happen. I think you're seeing a lot of untapped talent markets too that didn't used to be available. I mean, you used to see there was a very conventional way you did things, and you had to do everything that way. And if you didn't do it that way, you were doing it wrong. And I can't speak to other professions other than what I've dealt with professionally, but I would think other professions are like that too. And I have seen what it is. I mean, there's still a long way to go. We have a lot of work to do, but I do think that people are more empathetic and compassionate to, there's more than one way to do this now. Like you would never see a remote workforce now. Like I don't think anybody in our LA office, I mean, I go in sometimes, but, like our New York and our Bay Area office, everybody goes in. They all want to, with a few exceptions, because they like seeing people. But in our LA office, a lot of people don't come in. And also I have people that are really good talent that frankly, not just are here, but I think there's a lot of talent, maybe for personal reasons or child or elder care or other things, may not be able to work a traditional 9-to-5 job in the commuting. So I have seen that with the remote workforce. There's been a huge change. And so there's a lot of people out there that are, I mean, a lot of my staff I talk to like this. We have a firm lunch on Friday. Everybody's Zooming. Everybody's Zooming, because I mean, they don't want to see more of me than they have to. They don't. They're nice people. I hope they appreciate it. I hope they like working here, but I mean, they don't want to go drive out to some place. And, I mean, I used to have to do it, and some were kind of fun. You go out, you get in the car, you all caravan over there. You wait for the hostess to seat you. You all look, you make small talk. This is like, I mean, holidays, I don't even do a holiday party anymore. I'm like, you guys are just getting extra money or pay or gift card. They probably want that. Well, that's probably, they want the time off. Just take those extra time off and get paid. They'd much rather have that than see me. They see enough of me. They don't get enough meals from me. They do. They'll also do. I'll get a text, and as nice as they are, I'm sure they'd all say, "Okay, Hillary, okay, yeah."
No, I mean that's great. And but yeah, I think we should throw the holiday party, you know. I guess you could do both if you want.
We
Holiday
could do
party
a
and a gift.
holiday party. We'll see. I always feel like I've been to some of those. Some I like, some I don't.
Yeah, hit
Some
or
you have
miss.
to go to. And I just always feel like there's going to be a few people who are going, not so much because they want to, but they feel they have to. And I'm
Yeah.
kind of one of those things we do it. They do enough things. I do enough things. Not, I mean, I don't sit around and assess everything that I have to do. It's like we had to do some invoicing today and, things like that. And, they were not stern or combative, but you'd send emails and you deal with this. And if I sat there and pondered it, do I really want to do all that? No, of course not. I'd rather be out in a grassy field playing with some animals and I don't get into that. But there's enough. They do a lot for me.
Yeah,
They do a lot for the
absolutely.
clients. They do a lot for my partners. They do a lot for people here. And sometimes I just think that and again, I always let them vote. I go, yeah, guys, this is what I'm planning on doing if you want to have a party here. So I do talk to them about it, but I don't put people on the spot like, let's talk now. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Why not? Well, why do you want to do that? I just say, if you guys want to have a party at a certain different one, please do that. But, people are busy. They really
Yeah.
are. If you think about it, families, kids, not just the traditional families and kids. They may have other interests. They have friends they want to see. They may want to go to the gym, and those are all, they may have, I don't know, whatever they do in their personal lives. There's a lot to do in everyday life, and that's just another thing. So, and I've heard, you always hear about the proverbial holiday party. I just don't want to get into that,
Yeah.
with it. Some people really enjoy it. That being said, though, I have some friends of mine who do holiday parties quite, maybe not annually, but quite often, and I really enjoy going to them. And I think some people really like doing them. They have their Halloween parties. They have these people look forward to them. So some are really fun too. I'm not saying they're not, but as a whole, I just have always like, I don't want to force my staff to do anything like that. And we're going archery shooting. I think that's the plan. We're
Oh
going to go
wow.
to, like, they have a
Sounds
class.
cool.
We're not going to shoot each other. We're just going to
No.
go.
Yeah,
But the
yeah,
plan, sometimes we do lunches. Like we had she's not a very nice lady we work with, and the people who are in the area who are available, they go, you guys all want to come to lunch? We all went out to lunch, and stuff like that too. So we do stuff like that, or like, hey, do you guys, what do you, was thinking maybe doing this if people in the area want to come, if they're from New York, do you guys want to come to this, stuff like that I think might be fun, or if I also say, you guys, if there's something else you'd rather do, we could all go and, sort of, you know, take the afternoon off, and it's a firm outing, so they're paid, and they that
yeah.
stuff like that too. But I try to get an idea of like what they would like to do, as just
Yeah.
opposed to what I mean. I don't want to
That
be
makes sense.
that. I don't want to be that employer who's like, we've all seen it, and I know it's a stereotype, where they're like, oh God, we're going to this because the boss likes it. Okay, I don't want to do. I mean, they do a lot. They really, all of them do. They really do. They put up with me. I mean, yeah, they deal
You're
with all
awesome,
the.
Haley.
Well,
Hey,
thank you. They do
you're
with
awesome.
clients. Thank you. And they work very hard. Everybody here works really hard. I mean, this doesn't happen. They are like my assistants. I'm like, okay, just I got to get. I was wearing a t-shirt today, so I wore a jacket for you. So but and he's like, just remember to put on your jacket before you go. you know, but they do a lot. They really do, and they work hard. And they have lives too. Some people during the pandemic have gotten COVID. I've had colleagues who've had people they know passed away. They've gotten. There's been a lot for a lot of people during the pandemic. They. And there's, we've got the topsy turvy clients because it's not all smooth sailing. We try to make it look like it is.
Yeah.
Trial law is only like what you see as trial lawyers and then the media and all that stuff is less than 5% of the work that goes on. Like
Oh
you'll
wow.
have, we had a hearing a while back and it was weeks and I mean, months and months and months preparing. And we were there 20, 30 minutes.
Mm.
That was it. Just all
Wow.
these months and all these people preparing and all these things. So
Wow.
people don't
For
always
30
realize.
minutes.
Yeah, they do. Like if you've been on a movie set and if you've been involved, you're in production, you're here. If you're, but just everything that you need to do to set this up and just your whole operation and like production company, everything that goes into that just to get a few photos or it's similar to that, where you're just seeing a bit of it. You're not seeing everything, that went into this. And so it's a lot of work to get to that point. So it's a lot. So again, I try not to impose people, and I really do. Like I sometimes with staff, I'm like, everybody just go home, just don't worry. They're like, no, we want to get it done. I'm like, guys, I mean, I have a paralegal who often checks in at midnight and says, one of my other paralegals, God bless him, is like, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and he's emailing me.
Oh
That's
wow.
how dedicated he is. And I didn't tell him to. He's just like, no, I want to make sure that I got this. And I'm like, dude, you don't have to do that. But it's not, it's really nice that they do. But I mean, on the other hand, I have my assistant who stays up late after she puts her kids to bed and it's like, oh, I'm going to get this done. And I'm like, okay, but you can go home. If you want to work, it's fine. Cause I try to because sometimes it is nice to take the afternoon off of the kids and feed them dinner and help them with their homework and go back to work later. If they want to do that, they're welcome to, as long as there's not a deadline. But I try to be, but on the other hand, I don't want them feeling like they're up all the time.
Yeah, yeah, that's a delicate balance. It's a delicate balance for sure. And it sounds like you've figured it out. You create a great office culture and are a great leader and figure that out. That's not something that's easy to do.
I hope so.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like
It
you
doesn't
have.
always feel that way. I hope it is.
No, it sounds like you definitely have. Going forward, what trends? I've asked what changes you've seen in the last, since you got into to now. Going forward, what trends do you see happening in the next 5 or 10 years in trial lawyering?
I think you're going to see a lot more people adhering to procedures.
What does that mean to a novice like myself?
A
Adhering to procedure.
procedure is like, you have to file your paperwork within this date. You
Okay.
have to do this. You're going to see rules of evidence are going to change a lot, because I've noticed, like with texting, people will often say, oh, such and such attach this text, and then they'll attach the text to a declaration or as evidence. There are new rules coming out all the time about that. And so use of social media, because use of social media is a treasure trove, as you can imagine,
Oh
for
yeah.
any. Yeah. Once you're in litigation, don't delete it. Talk to your lawyer. Don't do that. There's a lot of new cases about what you can do to get into evidence, because a text can be modified. Sometimes we've had cases like this where the person will sort of take out parts of the text.
Mm.
They'll do that. So there are new rules about the admissibility of evidence to prove they're actually what they say they are. You have to keep your phone, you have to keep all those sort of things. I think with evidence and things like that, as long as social media is big, I think you're going to see some huge changes, huge, in cyber liability and security. I mean, you're seeing the bank runs right now. You're seeing it's not if, it's when, if you get hacked. Insurance is going to play a big role, what's insured and what is not insured for things like that. And I think you're also going to see what right now I'm sort of seeing is there's a lot of pushback, because there's this tension right now between what we'll call, every generation has it. When you were a kid, you probably think about that. People always say, oh, you kids are doing this. That's happened throughout history, I'm sure. I don't even know, but I bet in the 14, 15, 16, 17, there are people going, what are those kids doing now? Why are they using that plow and that tractor instead of
Yeah.
this? Because I can have the
Yeah.
ox do it, whatever they were doing. I don't know, but I think it's likely. But
Yep.
I do see a tension right now where there's, people saying, you're missing a lot because you're not in person. And then the other people saying, well, there's a lot you're missing because of this. So there's a lot of pushes to start getting things done in person as opposed to that. I don't know if that's going to be effective, because I think there's a lot of other things you cannot do when you're meeting someone in person. Like there's the speed, the efficiency, the travel, accessibility. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of people who, is it really fair to say the person who can afford to travel and afford to take time off and afford to go over there gets priority and they get rewarded, whereas someone who can zoom in and take a 30 to 60-minute break from their job or whatever they're doing, is that really fair to reward these other people meeting in person? Maybe people don't want to meet in person. I think the newer generation is not used to doing that. Their whole
Yeah.
social lives are online. They
Yeah.
are. They meet in person. I have a friend of mine, her kids still call each other, call people. They've taught their kids to call. I'm like, your kids call like mine do. And it's like kids are like, speaker, like, and maybe they do sometimes, but there's not, I'm exaggerating to make a point, the emoji, but is it really fair to do something like, can someone really drive across town? Or what if they're, what if someone's way out in another county? Is that really fair to not to include them because of that? And, things like that too. And, is a person really comfortable walking to a room of people they don't know, where there's a group they know, it becomes very localized that way. So I think I do notice there's a lot of people saying that, but I also think it's a lot of the people who are used to doing things that way. They are used to, I see that is a huge change. And I don't think anybody really knows where the internet is going, the use of social media and things like that. Yeah, I do think there's going to be laws and regulations that will surprise people because of world events and things like that too. But right now we have so much access to information. I like it because it used to be you had to go over and research it, or there was some online things if you were a lawyer, and it was, you were lucky to get this, and you kind of had to believe what you saw because you didn't really have time or the ability to go look at all these other resources, and that was for the government and really rich people, and everybody else just private investigators who slaved away for weeks and no one else. So that I see as being a big situation. I've noticed, like I was in court the other day, and people are zooming in all the time. I mean, there sometimes there's hardly anybody in the courtroom. Like, oh, you're going in the courtroom. Like once in a while, I've had court appearances where everybody's on Zoom, and then there's one person in the courtroom. Like, oh, there's someone in there. I mean, the court staff is in there, and the judge is in there, and that's still. But they're in. It's a public, and that's their job. But I was like, you see someone come, like, why is someone coming in for the hearing? It's sort of that's been a huge change. I do think. But admissibility of evidence and procedure, there's going to be a lot of that. I could see a proliferation of litigation. It's how to use video, things like that. A lot of rules that are coming out because people are still trying this, but it used to be, it's like, hey, just give me a screenshot and we'll do this. That doesn't work anymore and things like that. I think the roles of attorneys and administrators, because attorneys to some degree are administrators. So, it's not to help the system work, are going to become a lot more important. I think you're going to see a lot of other traditional jobs that were obsolete will become obsolete. I used to work in a firm where the guy had a typewriter. I'm like, oh, did you use those? And he was like, oh, I did. And I was like, no, it makes sense. At one point in history, they did. I think employment law will be huge. Those kind of things. It used to be that budgets will become more important. California's cut their budgets. It used to be, I've had trials that go to almost 8 o'clock at night. They'll keep you with the staff. Now they can't because of overtime. And they're kind of like, no, stop. We're stopping now. Counsel, I got to send these people on break because of the labor laws and breaks, things like that. They don't work into lunch. They don't come back early. They're like 12 to 1:30. No, we're not here right now. That's the staff's time. Pretty much everybody closes at 4 and goes home. They're like, they're packed up and they're gone. Sorry.
Wow.
You want to go to private judging, things like that. Private judging has become very, very popular for the, not you can afford that though.
How does that work? Yes, I've never heard of that before.
Private judging is arbitration, or they have mediation, arbitration, and there's JAMS, there's Judicate West, and American Arbitration Association. They have either trained lawyers, or a lot of the time, the big thing now is retired judges. So they retire from the bench, and then they go on to a career there. And there's traditionally they call it rent a judge. It's much more than that, but essentially you have a judge who you're paying privately, to preside over your matter, and they have a briefing schedule and everything else, and they look at it and they send it in, and they rule on your matter. And if mediation is voluntary, they can't make rulings there, but they help to settle a case, or they make arbitration awards that can be filed with the court and become judgments. So they have these private judges. So they have a lot of them. Again, it's not cheap. It's not everybody can afford that. And so there's always the affordability issue, isn't there? But it's a nice alternative to that. And they also are having a lot of settlement judges and things like that. They're trying to resolve these things with people. But the willingness to Zoom and do a lot of this, I think, makes it a lot nicer, because some people, just to travel across 2 counties or do that, it's a lot to ask. It's a lot. So you have the added stress of doing that. So I think there are some benefits, but I do see issues of cybersecurity, and things like that. I think we haven't really seen much. We've seen some of it, but I don't think we've seen the extent of what it could be. That's what I.
Wow, that's what an education, Hillary. This is just amazing to hear everything from every aspect. You're to use an old school term, encyclopedia. You're
thank you.
Such a wealth of knowledge, and I mean that obviously the best possible.
No, I
way.
do. I took it that way. I appreciate you saying that.
Yes, just such a wealth of knowledge for this field. for listeners and viewers out there that may be interested in becoming a trial lawyer or just a lawyer in general, what career advice would you have for the 20 something or the teenager that's about to go to college and want to get into your field?
I think it's very doable for you. I think don't believe everything you see on TV. If I would actually, go and talk to lawyers, don't be put off or dissuaded by someone who had a bad experience. There are a lot of bitter lawyers out there. It's
Yeah.
also, I think, one of the highest issues to depression, and substance abuse. Those are real
Oh
issues in
wow.
the medical profession too. Those are issues where people have. I'm not saying all lawyers are like that. I would
Yeah.
go, think about what kind of work you want to do and why you want to do that. And there are different areas. And so I would also say, try an internship or try something. Also, if you're interested in court work, go to a court hearing. They're public hearings. You can
Yeah.
literally go to the court's website and you can zoom in. There's no rule you can't unless it's
Wow.
closed, which doesn't happen very often. So people don't always understand that it's a public hearing. You
Huh.
can go in and just watch a hearing. You can go sit in the courtroom and just watch a court's calendar. But also believe in yourself. I mean, being a lawyer, fortunately, I think it used to be you had a few scholarship kids who were lucky, a few
Yeah.
tokens. Then you had, frankly, the rich kids. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be wealthy. I'm not at all. I mean, I'm a big fan of being financially independent and having enough money to do what you need to do. But I think for certain people, just they were in a situation where it's like, I can't afford, it was much easier for someone who's wealthy as opposed to, that's not the case anymore. And if you look at, like, for example, a lot of trial lawyers, they don't have traditional backgrounds. They really
Mm.
don't, because it's a different skill set than someone you'd say, because you kind of figure, well, if they went to an Ivy League school and they did this, they're the ones they're going to pick. They're never going to pick me. That's not the case. So don't
Yeah.
be put off by that. I think, traditionally it kind of grew out of, like, these old traditional things. It's not the case anymore. And there are a lot of places in society for lawyers, even if you don't want to be one. So I would be very open and flexible and know that you have a lot to offer. If you believe you have a lot to offer and you follow these rules and you abide by that, you're going to.
Awesome.
It's and again, I think that is probably the most important thing, but it's almost always very, very doable. And if you get D's and F's in college, you're probably not going to go to law school. I'm going to tell you that right now. I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to have to make it a priority. Sometimes being a lawyer, it's like anything else you want to do. You means, well, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I can't. I remember when I was particularly when I was in my 20s, a lot of my friends were still going out a lot and, things like that before they had kids, or if they did or didn't, or, they were going out a lot. They're going this and they're going on this vacation. I'm like, yeah, I can't go do that. I got to get up in the morning and I got to go, I have a trial, I have a hearing. I mean, it's not that your job doesn't matter, but I'm dealing with someone's life here and
Yeah.
I can't leave them. To you guys, it's like, well, oh, sorry, boss, I didn't get that thing done on time. Like, I have a good friend of mine, his husband's a surgeon. He's an ICU doctor. And so, literally during the pandemic. So what's he going to say?
Wow.
Sorry, I don't feel like coming in. I can't deal with you today. I mean, there are, and I'm not a doctor, but there are, that we deal with serious matters. So, you kind of have to just know that you have different priorities, and lawyers are held to a higher standard, and they should be.
Yeah.
But I do think if you're serious, don't just believe in what you see on TV. Go to a court hearing, just not court TV. I mean, I'm not saying those things don't happen. You look at what they do. If that's what you want to do, we're fortunate we're living, at least at this point in history, a lot of very accessible information, because
Yeah.
historically that's not been the case. A few people knew a few things and the rest of us had to believe what we were told or whatever. What's that phrase? History goes to the winners. You know how they would,
Oh yeah. Yep.
so they say, like, yeah, that didn't actually happen, but they're saying it did, and people believe it.
Yep.
So we're living, at least currently, in a situation where you can have access and you can look at people, and there are a lot of different ways to do things. So just because you didn't do something the way someone else did, it does not mean you're not going to be good at or successful. So I wouldn't be put off by that. I mean, people have lots of different backgrounds and lots of different skill sets for that. I would say, a lot of people think about law school and being a lawyer a lot. Like, I hear that it's one of those very common. So make sure, again, it may not be for you right away, but if it's something you really don't think you're going to be good at or want to do, really look at what being a lawyer is and get an idea. And if you don't like that, don't do it.
Yeah.
It's because it's not, because otherwise it becomes just like anything else. You're in a job you don't like and you're like, well, I have a house, a mortgage, kids, or, other responsibilities, student loans, I've got, I got to make a living here. Where else are they going to pay me this much? But being at a job you hate or don't like is not worth doing. I mean,
Exactly.
it's certainly not for the rest of your life. If you think if you start out in your 20s and you're going to live, whatever you're supposed to expect to live to be at least 100 now, I mean, do you want to be doing that for 60 or 70 years? I don't know that. I mean, I guess I did if I had to, but I don't want, we're not factory workers like in the olden days where people slaved away and stood over a table and couldn't move because if they did, they'd be, whipped or something or fired and wind up destitute, or something like that. So, there are, you have options, but make sure it's something, sometimes people don't always know, but the way I would say it is there's a lot of things you can do with a law degree. So if you decide ultimately not to be a lawyer, would you go in-house? Could you work for a company? Because that is a lot of people are very, very interested in having lawyers come work for them because they have skills that a lot of other people don't.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And it's kind of like going in the corporate space, but having that, that lawyering background is, wow, I never thought about that, but you're exactly right.
If you were a lawyer and didn't practice anymore and went to the corporate world, you'd probably do very, very well.
Wow.
And there are a lot of different ways to be a lawyer. You could be a public interest lawyer. You could be a DA, a public defender. You could be, do like media and defamation, all this kind of law. What we do, you could be transactional lawyer. You could do trust and estates, family law, intellectual property, real estate. There's a lot to do in real estate. That's a big area. Employment law is too. So there's not just one, and again, just always remember, just because one person did it one way doesn't mean you have to.
Yeah.
I know people like to think that my way is the only way. It's not true. I mean, I'm sure you and I have very different life paths, but it works for us, so we do it, but it doesn't mean it's right for everybody. It's everybody has their own way. And I think you just believe in yourself. Just believe in yourself. Don't take a lot of shit. That's not a good idea. So can I say this guy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very true.
Yeah, well, I'm in a podcast, but I want to be. It's meant in a respectful way. But there's life will push you around if you let it, and I think everybody's been in that situation before. But it's believe in yourself.
Yeah, no, that's tremendous advice, Hillary, and that's awesome. I think that's a great way to wrap it up. And I want to get just where can people see you? Website, company website. Social media, if you have.
I would be happy to. We're on LinkedIn and Facebook. I think we have a Twitter. We're just starting. I'm Hillary at Hillary. It's HillaryTrialLawyers.com with an S. And I can be reached at Hillary Trial Lawyers. And we handle cases in New York, D.C., and California, and soon to be Montana. Some in Montana soon. And we handle lots of media and employment law and business law and intellectual property. And we're happy to help you. Or if you have questions or need advice or a podcast like a nice one I just attended today, we're happy to help you.
Awesome, Hillary. And you were an awesome guest, one of my favorites already. So huge thanks. And I feel like I just learned a lot, so much more than what I've known for years, or the little I've known for years. I feel like I'm a much better, knowledgeable person in the space now a little bit. So it's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great talking to you. It's wealth of knowledge.
Thank you for being so welcome. He is very charming. For everybody he's as charming as he looks and sounds. He really is.
Thank you so much, Hillary. It was awesome. And thank you for listening to Adeptus on Air.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus on Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. If you have a question related to this episode or have a request for what you would like to hear, please email us at marketing@adeptuscpas.com. You can also find us at adeptuscpas.com online or follow us at Adeptus on social media. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.